All right, I want to welcome everybody to Introduction or Beginner's Fly Tying. This is session 2. I'm a member of the FFI Education Committee. I am the strategic planner for FFI, writing where we're going to go for the next 3 years. I'm a certified fly fishing instructor and area chief with Texas Parks and Wildlife. I hold the FFI Gold Award level for fly tying. I've tied at Oktoberfish, TRWD Fly Fest, Texas Bruin Fly Fest. I'm also a very proud member of the Roadkill Roundtable. It's a group of extremely experienced tiers that have been around since 1972. And starting in January, for any of you that are interested, we'll be doing a Zoom online class for tying for the Bronze Award with FFI. I'm going to be working on the dry pheasant tail variant. If you decide to tie for one of the FFI awards, you start at the bronze level. I'm probably biased. I love the FFI awards program. I encourage everyone to do it. I do not think I would be tying where I'm tying today at the level I am without that award program.
It will definitely make you a better tyer.
It does, and it teaches you a lot of things about proportions that become very important.
And precision.
And precision, and learned about material. So I highly encourage it. It's on the website, FFI. You can download the book on the bronze. Like I say, in January, I'm going to be teaching a free online class. If anybody wants to sit in on it, they're welcome. But today
you should be able to tie with Jack on that. And at the end of it, you basically will have your bronze submission ready to go.
All right, today we're going to start with a size 12 dry fly hook is what it calls for. That's more of a size 12 there. I'm tying with something just a little bit bigger so you guys can see it easier. You need thread, Rust 8/0 is what I'm using for this. The tail is, let me change cameras here. I'm going to be tying with a rooster in brown, a little bit of a variant, but this is a brown rooster hackle fiber. And then we're going to have some fine silver wire. And then we're going to just do rooster pheasant tail for the body. I think you can see that. Okay. All right, so we're going to start, as Barry mentioned, with a jam hitch. Now, again, I tie, like Barry, a lot of salmon flies. And believe it or not, Barry spent 2 days in a class just learning thread control. And normally I would start tying in by keyer because that's where my first material is going to go. But I'm going to follow the directions in the program, which is where you should start with. So we're going to start about 1 eye length back on the hook shank, 5 or 6 edge to edge wraps, and you'll have your jam hitch and you'll have it all locked in. I just take, like Barry mentioned, the edge of my scissors, come in and pop it off. I don't ever cut the tips of it. And then we're going to continue wrapping all the way back. Now you can do edge to edge, or the instructions actually allow open spirals. One thing I do want to point out here is be very careful. Thread is very easy to cut in some cases. I use barbless hooks. I buy these from Firehose, so they don't come with a barb, so I don't have to cut it off. However, Firehose hooks are extremely, extremely sharp. And if you drag your thread across that as you're coming back, you're going to weaken that thread, and it's going to break on you at some point. So as you start coming, you're going to come in at an angle to avoid hitting that point of that hook. In the beginning, it'll take, even as an experienced tyer, that still happens where you hit it, but be very careful, try to avoid it. And the next thing you want to do, counterclockwise, spin your thread. You want to keep it flat at all times. Some people will tell you after about every 8 to 10 wraps of thread, you're going to want to counter wrap it to flatten it back out. Okay, first thing we're going to do is add the tail. And we're going to take a rooster hackle fiber here, and we're going to take off about 10 to 15 fibers off the shaft there, off the stem. Get them as even as you can. And we're going to typically tie in the tail about 1 shank length of the hook. Now, you'll see people do different things out there. You'll come in, especially as a beginner, you'll say, okay, that's the length of the hook right there. Well, actually, it's not the length of the shank. Your shank actually runs from, I'll try to do the other side here, about this point right here to just where it starts to bend, about where the barb is. That's a shank length. So that's the size we want. And so we're just going to keep till we get our fingers at the right place there. Okay, now we're there. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to switch it over to my left hand. And I'm going to place it right on top of the hook and bring a wrap around. Bring your thread straight up. If you don't, if you start bringing it at an angle, you're going to cause it to roll over, and then it won't be on top any longer. Okay. So now that we've got our tail on there and it's nice and straight, we're going to come in and trim out some of this excess here up to about an eye length back on the shank, about where we started our thread. Reason being, I want to build up a little bit of body in there. You have to excuse my awkwardness. I've got a camera in front of me here, and it's not a natural way to tie. All right, and then we're going to go ahead with edge to edge wraps. And we're going to lay a thread base over the top of that fibers, the butts of them, and build up a base here. Make sure it stays on top. If it starts twisting on you, just pull it back over a little bit. Okay, flatten your thread. One of the purposes in fly tying, especially if you get into salmon flies, you want absolutely no extra bulk on there whatsoever. And in some cases, you look at a Jock Scott, which is a very famous salmon fly. It has 32 different materials tied onto the hook. So you can kind of understand why bulk becomes an issue. Make sure when you're taking your thread back, it comes exactly to the base of the tail. You don't want to go any further, because if you start taking your thread further over, it's going to cause that tail to go down. And you're not wanting the tail down, you're wanting it straight out. At this point, we're going to take a piece of wire. As Barry pointed out, you always want to keep it wrapped under the lip here. In the beginning, I would take off extra wire. I don't need anywhere near that much. It's just easier to tie with as you're learning. You can helicopter that off if you want, or I have an old cheap pair of scissors that I use for cutting things like this. Although I'm not tying any hair on this fly today, when you're cutting hair, I don't recommend using your good scissors either. It will dull it. Go to Michael's or some art shop. These are Fiskars. They're about $12 to $15. They're extremely sharp. They're almost like razor blades, but I use that to cut hair. Okay, we're going to tie the wire in on this side, leaving just a little stub out there so we make sure we anchor it in well. And then we can do open spiral wraps back up to the beginning again. And then we're going to come back. At this point, I would start doing edge to edge wraps so we keep our body smooth and even at this point. Take your time. You don't want the thread to overlap on top of another thread. Otherwise, you start building a tapered body, and this one does not call for a tapered body. Again, we're going to come back to the exact same spot that we were before. Go ahead and give it a counterclockwise spin. I'll mention that several times because you do want to keep your thread very, very flat. At this point, we're going to take our pheasant tail and we're going to cut off about 4 or 5 fibers off of the stem. I'm going to look for some longer ones here. Because of the, now you'll want to adjust it to whatever size fly you're tying. Just trim them off. And then you'll end up with something that looks like this. We're going to tie these in by the tips, not the butt. Here's the tips. The butt's what I cut off the stem. So we're going to turn it around. And we're going to tie them in by the tips right here. Again, edge to edge wraps as we go forward at this point in time. All the way back up to about 1/3 of the hook shank back from the eye. So somewhere about right there. And then we're going to wrap the pheasant forward to form a body. And watch out for the hook point because it will cut them. Other thing you want to do is you want to keep your pheasant tail very flat. So the way to do that is come in here and just rest your finger on top of it and kind of push them around a little bit. Again, watch out for that hook point till we get past it. Otherwise, if you don't do this, your pheasant tail can start twisting on you and it'll build up a thicker body than you want and a rounded body. And this calls for flat. We're going to come back up to that about 1/3 the length of the hook back from the shank. I'm sorry, back from the eye. And once we've got it there, we're going to come around and we're just going to lock it in. Like Barry mentioned, usually a couple turns in back, a couple of turns in front, and then one in back again. And that's locked in there very tightly. I don't know if you notice in the theme here, but as you learn to tie, especially salmon flies, everything comes in 5s. So that's why you see us do only 5 twists there. And then just trim it off. And you're ready to go at that point. Now, at this point, we're going to counter wrap the rib. As Barry mentioned earlier, this is wrapping, and then we call counter wrap, coming back underneath and coming forward from the underneath side. Make sure that your wires coming across at the same angle and that they're evenly spaced. If one's not, if you come up here and it's like that, just take it loose, redo it, because you want them evenly spaced. Especially if you start going for one of the award levels, your evaluator will look very strongly at that. Now, I know it looks simple when I do it. Believe me, when I started out, it was not simple. In fact, when I tied for the gold level, the first thing they told me to do is get a pair of calipers. And when they say 1/3, they mean 1/3. If the bronze is not quite that strict. As Barry told me when I first started tying for the bronze, if you make a mistake on a fly, make sure you make it on all 3 that you have to turn in, because you have to turn in 3 exactly alike. I probably tied, 30 flies each to get 3 that were identical.
Yeah, and they look more at the 3 flies for each category that you turn in being identical. Then it's all about precision in tying and making sure that the flies you tie are exactly the same.
Yeah, they're looking for consistency in the beginning. Now, if you get up to the gold level, you're allowed maybe 1 minor mistake. Anything beyond that, you won't pass because it requires a score of 95 at the gold level. As Barry mentioned, just come in here and helicopter it off is the easiest way. Or you can take your old a dull pair of scissors. You know, as you're buying, and I think David mentioned when he was doing the equipment, the one thing I would definitely invest the most in starting out is a good pair of scissors.
Yep.
They're absolutely essential to fly tying. And you know, a good pair of what, $30, 28 to $30. All right, so at this point, we're going to tie in the hackle. Again, we're going to use just another rooster hackle. If you'll notice, of course, they got the fluff, and we always want to remove that. Just rip it off of there. But again, you start watching for things as you tie more and more that, look how, I don't know how well you can see it, but look how thick that stem is down here at the butt section. When I get up here, it gets much thinner. When I'm tying a fly, I don't want all of this thickness on my fly. So I'm going to come up here to where it's thinner and go ahead and trim it off there and use from that point. Now, some patterns you're going to tie in by the tip. And if you do, you just kind of pull down here. I'll go ahead and do it. If you're tying in by the tip, you'll pull about a ½ an inch down and you'll just cut it off. So you got a small triangle to tie in with. But this one calls for tying in by the butt section. Again, we want to make sure the orientation, because we want our hackle fibers to go to the rear. And you'll notice as I'm tying in, I don't know how we can see it there. I think I need a different color behind me. I'm leaving just a little bit of stem there, not only to tie in, but I'm leaving a little bit extra on the top. So let me, I've got room to tie it in. I want to make sure it's snug, but I've left a little bit here on the top. So when I start to turn this and tie it in, it will go on in the correct direction. Now you can just wet your fingers and pull the fibers back, or you can use a little bit of wax. I have some wax that's a little oilier than normal, and a lot of times I'll use it. And then once you get it to the point you want it, just come in here and lock it down with a couple of behinds, a couple in front, and another behind. And then you'll want to come in and either trim it off as Barry mentioned, or you can come in and, you know, just cut it. Whatever's easiest for you. I'll cut it, Barry trimmed it. And then at this point, we're going to build a small head. So to make sure none of my fibers get trapped, because that's something an evaluator will look for when he's judging your fly, is trapped fibers. You want to pull them back and just tie back over them a little bit. Not very much. This is a very small head on this fly. As you can see. Now you can go a little bit bigger than that, not to keep bringing up salmon flies, but when you tie salmon flies, you tie an extremely small head. And then, excuse the awkwardness here, the camera right where the tool would normally go for whip finishing it. You want to start at the back, come forward with side to side wraps so that you end up with your thread at the front in the proper place to do the whip finish knot. At this point, just take your scissors, open them up, pop it off. If you have a nice pair of scissors, they're going to be extremely sharp and you'll have no issue doing that. At this point, you can add either head cement. It comes in different types and styles. Some people use, what is it, crazy, not crazy glue.
Is
You-
it Zap? Is it
Super glue.
Zap-A-Gap?
Zap-A-Gap, there's super glue. Some people use Gorilla Glue. I've got them all here. In
UV
salmon
glue.
flies, I typically use varnish. And so that's what I'm going to use. That's what I like using. And I just take a small bodkin, dip it in there, and then just put a drop or two right on top. The downside to using varnish, it'll take it about 5 minutes to dry. Super glue or Gorilla Glue would dry in a minute or two. If you're using one of the UV resins, then you can just pop it with the light, ultraviolet light, and it'll dry in about 15 seconds. And that is your dry pheasant tail variant. All right, do we have any questions? I know if that one's a little quicker and a little faster to tie than the woolly bugger.